I'm asking you to speculate here again, so no one's going to hold you to this, but this time around, would you expect the US dollar to be supplanted by another competing currency, or do you think we might fracture into kind of a multi-currency system for at least some period of time?
Well, the way things are going now, your latter scenario is more likely. We all know the problems, the political and economic problems of the US dollar. It's not a secret. Everybody knows it, and everybody knows that people are looking. It's being accelerated. I mean, the Ukraine war has accelerated this surge because of what the US did. They just seized assets. They blocked assets of innocent people. They just said, we suspect something's up, and they seized their assets or blocked their assets. So many people, this movement is being accelerated by Washington's our actions. I hate to say, I'm not trying to scare people. I'm just telling you how the world has always worked.
Yep.
This is the way the world has always worked, just as from the Old Testament, they had 7 good years and 7 bad years. I mean, this has been going on a long, long, long time. So don't listen to me. Just read some history, do your own research, and then you will get knowledgeable. And if you get knowledgeable, you will get worried, because you will see this has happened many times before, and it's going to happen again, as it always has. And those who are prepared and knowledgeable will do well and survive. Some people came out of the 30s very rich.
How bad do you think we could be due for a housing correction, both with a slowing economy and just with the math of mortgage rates moving this much? And the reason why I ask that is because, potentially that has a much more bigger effect on the negative wealth effect, just because housing is owned by so many more people.
Well, I just want to go, you keep talking about high interest rates. Adam, these interest rates in the United States in 2022, by historic standards, are not high. They're higher than they were a year ago. But look back at the history of America, the history of any country, but since we're Americans, these are not high interest rates in American history. So they have the scope and the historic precedent to go much, much higher, which I suspect they will, for the reasons that we've discussed. And that will have a dramatic effect on housing. We have had a huge amount of home building in the last decade or so. I don't have the numbers at hand, but I know everybody has been building houses. Some would call that a bubble, but even if it's not a bubble, it has certainly been a boom. And when that comes to an end, if your house goes down in price, it doesn't affect you too badly unless you have to sell or something. But then when your neighbors' houses start going down and your relatives' houses start going down, then you really feel the pressure, because if I have to sell, or whatever wealth I thought I had, I don't have anymore. And then people everywhere start talking about it, because, one of the things that many people talk about are property prices, house prices. And if they start going down, it's going to be high on their list of things to talk about, much higher than the football game. If everybody's house price is going down, everybody's going to talk about it and moan and complain, which leads to more pessimism.
Right. And tightening of consumer purse strings, which then depresses consumer spending, which then makes a recession potentially even worse. I appreciate the reminder, Jim, about the historic levels of interest rates. And you're right. I should say relatively high interest rates, given where they've been, in recent years. I think one thing that, though, is different is even at the higher interest rates back in the 70s, like you're mentioning, the ratio of home prices to income were much more sane relative to where they are right now, given how distorted home prices have gotten. So the only reason why I mention that is because it makes the destructive impact of a rising interest rate even more in this type of environment, which you're nodding as we're saying this. All right. So the other question is just on jobs. I assume if you believe that we're going to have the worst recession in your lifetime, then you expect that the outlook for jobs the jobs market is probably not very good over the next 1 to 2 years. Is that accurate?
Well, again, just look at the numbers and what has happened throughout history. Yes, we've had lots. I mean, I think unemployment has been the lowest in a long time in the U.S. When we start having problems, it goes from the lowest, it usually goes much higher. Things, when they get overextended on the downside, they get overextended on the upside. That's the way the world works. That's the way history works. So, no, of course, I would expect unemployment to go higher and higher.
Okay. And the reason why I've sort of been walking through this string is if I can sort of wrap everything that you've said so far up, it's plan for bad times ahead for financial markets and thus your investment. Plan for your house to go down in value, and plan for insecurity in your job going forward. And I'm not trying to super paint gloom and doom just for the sake of it, but we've got real people watching this program, and to have a venerated, expert like you deliver a message like this, hopefully people, take some time now to do a little bit of pre-planning, so that if indeed what you expect to happen happens, that maybe they're a little bit less exposed to it because they took some preventative measures now.
Well, Adam, forget forget anything. Just read some history. I'm not trying to scare people. I'm just telling you how the world has always worked.
Yep.
This is the way the world has always worked, just as from the Old Testament, they had 7 good years and 7 bad years. I mean, this has been going on a long, long, long time. So don't listen to me. Just read some history. Do your own research, and then you will get knowledgeable. And if you get knowledgeable, you will get worried, because you will see this has happened many times before, and it's going to happen again, as it always has. And those who are prepared and knowledgeable will do well and survive. Some people came out of the 30s very rich.
I'm asking you to speculate here, but if and when it is the US dollar's time to lose its privilege as the world reserve currency, do you expect that to be more of an event or a process? Right? Is it something that happens over years or decades, or is it something that kind of just one morning you wake up and there's a new regime?
Well, it's usually a process. More and more people get affected as more and more measures get taken by the politicians to save you. They hurt you always, but it's usually a process. Now, eventually, it's like I can remember 1976 when Britain went bankrupt. It was on the evening news everywhere when that happened. But that process had been trained for several years, several decades.
All right. So is it sort of like the old Hemingway quote, how do you go broke gradually and then all at once? It was sort of deteriorating and then bang, it became a crisis.
That's exactly the way it happens to nations, to currencies. Yes.
All right. And I'm asking you to speculate here again, so no one's going to hold you to this, but this time around, would you expect the US dollar to be supplanted by another competing currency, or do you think we might fracture into kind of a multi-currency system for at least some period of time?
Well, the way things are going now, your latter scenario is more likely. I mean, there is the European scenario, there is the Asian scenario, there is the Western Hemisphere. There are varieties of spheres of influence that could be, because I don't see, in the 60s, the 50s and 60s, there was the US dollar because of what happened in the Second World War and after. So it was very clear who was riding up to replace the pound. I don't see that happening now. Yeah. So I would suspect it's going to be spheres of influence or spheres of currencies, if you want to look at it that way. And eventually one of them will come out on top, either after a war or after its depression or something. Some kind of historic event will take place, somebody will then suddenly rise to the top over the various regions. But again, I don't know. I don't know who or what or when.
Okay, and I don't want to reveal any of your membership in private closed door Illuminati, we rule the world groups, but I have had a couple of speakers on this program. I'll mention them by name really quickly. One is Simon Hunt. I'll link to my interview with him here. One is Alistair McLeod. I'll link to my interview with him again here, where they have talked about apparently sort of an Asian bloc, or at least a bloc of countries led by Asia, that is apparently looking to put together a commodities-backed currency, potentially priced in gold grams. I'm just curious, is this anything that you hear about living out there in Asia, or is you sort of watching
I read the same things you do. You don't have to have closed doors, bars or something. We all know the problems, the political and economic problems of the U.S. dollar. It's not a secret. Everybody knows it, and everybody knows that people are looking. It's being accelerated. I mean, the Ukraine war has accelerated this surge because of what the U.S. did. They just seized assets. They blocked assets of innocent people. They just said, we suspect something's up, and they seized their assets or blocked their assets. So many people, this movement is being accelerated by Washington's our actions, I hate to say.
Check out this video to find out why Jim Rogers thinks the next recession will be the biggest he's ever seen, and where you can invest so you don't take the fall.